book. I'm going to preach today, so I'm not teaching. So if you wanted to be funny, you could say, well, that passage doesn't mean that. But what I'm doing is I'm taking a passage and using it as an analogy, okay? So I'm going to explain in a moment. So we've got this situation where everybody think of a bonfire, and you add wood to the bonfire and it makes the fire go up, yeah? You just keep adding wood to the fire and the fire gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, okay? In our Christian walks, in each and every one of us, there's a fire inside of us, this fire, this passion that I have for Jesus, this love that I had for Jesus, have, and I've got to keep adding wood to it. So it's going to keep burning, keep going bigger, keep going, keep going. This is the kind of thinking I had. And so I thought of a verse in Leviticus 6:13, and it says, the fire on the altar can never go out. Fire on the altar can never go out. We can never let the fire in us ever go out. And we're going to take a passage, we're going to read the passage, and then I'm going to use it to preach. Okay? So I'm not teaching from it, but I'm preaching from it, because I'm taking it out of context to mean what I'm about to use it for. But you'll understand as we go through. Can we have that little passage I'll give you in Acts? And it's this, where we've just had a storm, we've had a shipwreck. So there's a storm, rain, shipwreck. Paul's jumped into the water along with everyone else. They floated to get to shore. They're on the island of Malta, they're going to be. You remember the passage, end of Acts, chapter 28, verse 1 to 2. Now, when they'd escaped, they then found out that the island was called Malta. And the natives showed us unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire and made us all welcome. We're going to talk about that word kindled in a minute. And they made us all welcome because of the rain that was falling and because of the cold. But when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks, we're going to talk about a bundle of sticks in a moment, and laid them on the fire, a viper came out because of the heat and fastened on his hand. Remember that bit in a minute, and I'll show you what I mean by I'm preaching. Taking some out of context to preach it. A viper came out of the wood, if you like. The fire was made. The viper comes out, and where does it hang itself? Onto Paul's hand. So when the natives saw the creature hanging from his hand, they said to one another, no doubt this man is a murderer, whom, though he has escaped the sea, yet justice does not allow him to live. But he shook off the creature into the fire, and it suffered no harm. As we continue, we see verse 8, I think it was I gave you, Irene. Verse 8 says, and it happened that the father of Publius, lay sick of the fever. Paul went into him and prayed, and he did what? He laid hands on him and healed him. Where did the snake bite him? On his hand. What did God do with Paul? He used him to lay hands on him. So what am I saying when I say I'm preaching, not necessarily taking this and teaching? What I want to say to you by taking that little passage and saying, look, what the enemy bit, the hand, God wanted to use for a miracle, for a healing. And what I'm trying to say is sometimes you need to be aware that the very thing that God wants to use in your life to bless someone else, or the very thing that God wants to use in your life to bring a miracle, to bring salvation, to bring whatever it may be, that's the very thing that the enemy will attack. So if it was my finance, the enemy might attack it. If it was my career, the enemy might attack it. If it's my time, the enemy might attack it. Whatever it may be, the enemy will come to attack those very things that God wants to use. Only 3 verses before, there's a viper, a snake that has attached itself to the very hand that is about to be laid on a sick person to make the sick person well. It's a very small thing that we see, a little principle here where we say the very thing that God wants to use to bless others is the very thing that the enemy will try to attach itself to, the very thing that the enemy will try to bite, if you like. Now, if we place right back at the beginning, verse 1, we'll take our way through as we go. So before this fire's built, before Paul, you know the story now, you've got the passage that we're using, now we're preaching from it. So before this fire was built, there was a shipwreck. We've read in here that it was raining. There's a storm that's taking place. So what does Paul do? Paul says, let's build a fire. The snake bites him, the snake comes out, bites him, shakes it off, throws it back into the fire. That's the story. 3 things that I notice here. We've got a shipwreck that happens just before. We've got a storm that takes place just before. And we've got rain, because it says in this passage that we've got rain. So we've got a storm, we've got rain, and we've got a shipwreck. But they're about to build a fire. How are they going to build the fire? They're going to add wood to the fire. He goes and collects bundles of wood and he puts the bundles of sticks on. And I'm talking to you about we need to continue to add wood to the fire that's within us. Even though storms come our way, even though there's a shipwreck, even though there's rain. And so take storms, for instance. We all go through storms in our life. We all go through storms. Every single one of us goes through a storm, and yet we've got to continue to add wood to the fire. We can't be like, oh, there's a storm, that's it. Yeah, my fire's going to go out. It will extinguish it. If we allow the things of the world, it will extinguish the fire that is deep within us. Some storms we are delivered from. That's true. Some storms we're delivered from. Some storms we're delivered through. He delivers us through them. He takes us through them. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Even though I walk through it. So he delivers us through some storms, and other storms he actually delivers us from, where we don't actually have to go through it. I prefer those ones where he delivers us from them. But you know, we grow more when we go through them. That's where the believer grows the most. It's like the believer grows the most in the wilderness. And you think to yourself, oh, I'm all alone. God's left me alone. No, God hasn't left you alone. He's probably taken you, isolated you, so he can be alone with you. You can feel alone. But remember 2 weeks ago, we said when you get a setback, don't take a step back. It's the same kind of thing. When the storm comes to your life, don't take a step back. Keep building the fire. Keep building the fire. Keep adding wood to the fire. It's raining. Why build a fire in the rain? It says it's raining, so we build a fire. Who builds a fire in the rain? In the same way in our lives. In our lives, when we're going through tough times, if you think about those tough times, if you think about the rain, think about the rain as your habits. Think about the rain as your daily issues, your daily problems. When those daily problems, those daily habits are coming, you don't say, oh, I'm going to add more wood to the fire and make this passion that I have for Jesus bigger. Sometimes you go, I'm going to take a step back. That's the very time when you need to add to the fire. When it rains, you've got to add more wood to the fire. When you go through a storm, you've got to add more wood to the fire. You can't keep burying your head and saying, when the rain's passed, when the storm's passed, then I'll get passionate with Jesus. No, add more wood to the fire right now. Add more wood to the fire through the tough times. Add more wood. Keep adding wood. Keep adding wood. Make that fire burn brighter. We got to make it burn brighter. It's raining. It's not the time to build a fire. But he still builds a fire in the rain. And it's very difficult to build a fire in the rain. As it is very difficult for us, if you like, to increase the fire that we have for Christ, the love that we have for Christ in difficult times, because we don't go to our Bible as much. We don't worship as much. We do take a step back. We do feel like, oh, the world's on top of me. And yet that's the very time when we've got to go and do what Paul did. And he goes and collects a bundle of sticks, and he takes the bundle of sticks and he throws it on the fire. And we need to collect some bundles of sticks. And there's ways that I'll show us and I'll tell us why and how we should collect these bundles of sticks, if you like. The devil will always use unanswered prayer to bring offense and to extinguish the fire. Unanswered prayer, you've been praying for something like, God, deliver me from this, God, do this, God, do that. And if it doesn't come the way you want it, he uses it and it brings an offense to us. But Christianity is not a bridge over water. It's not a bridge over water. Remember that there are some storms that he will deliver us from, and there's some storms that he will deliver us through. Neither might be the best thing, because who wants to go through a storm? None of us want to go through a storm in this world. We'd like to just go through life, enjoying the finer things of life. Of course we would all want that. But if that's all we had and we had nothing, we had no time in the spiritual gym, if you like, to build our spiritual muscles. Well, we need storms in our lives. We need wildernesses. Because that separates those that truly follow Jesus and those that are on it for whatever other reason that they're going to church or whatever. Those that truly love God, when the storm comes, they will push into God. They will push into God. Each and every one of us needs to build a bigger fire. We need to add wood to the fire. Paul saw that it was raining. In our lives, some of us have questionable habits. We don't want them anymore. They're in our lives and we don't want them and we want to get rid of them. And so the average person will say to themselves, okay, I'll deal with this and then I'll go to church. Or I'll deal with this and then I'll feel worthy to be able to take communion. I'll deal with this and then I'll do this. No, it's raining, still build the fire. It's raining, still go collect the wood. The wood might be a prayer evening, the wood might be worship, the wood might be church, the wood might be getting into the word, the wood might be spending time with Jesus. Whatever it is, keep collecting the wood. Don't stop. Don't say, I'll go and collect the wood when I've dealt with this. I'm unworthy. I can't be used by God. God doesn't want to see this in my life. You're right. God doesn't want to see this in your life, but he doesn't want you taking a step back and then you thinking, I can now come forward because I've dealt with it. You'll be trying to deal with it in your own strength. Always remember this, the flesh cannot defeat the flesh. The flesh cannot defeat the flesh. Only the Spirit of God can defeat some of those things, those fleshy things in our life. Only when we work side by side with God can we defeat some of those things. I remember as an addict that I wanted to stop the addiction. Of course I did. I wanted to stop the addiction. When I found Christ, the addiction did stop. There was times when I slipped up and I went back to the drugs and I'd have like a session one last weekend. I missed my friends and I'd be like, I'll just have one last blast with them. And then I wouldn't do anything for 6 months. And then I'd go back one last blast with them. The flesh can't defeat the flesh. What it needed was an encounter with God that would come in and say, Aaron, enough of this. And in that moment, for me, it was a message that was given to me from someone, a word from God that shook my core. And he said, Aaron, I've got this word that God's asked me to give you. And it's a verse out of the Bible. And he was hesitant in giving it me, but he gave it me. And it said this, you're neither hot nor cold. Jesus was talking to a church at the time. He said, you're neither hot nor cold, but you're lukewarm. I'm about to spew you out of my mouth. It gave me a fear of God. It's what the church misses today, is the fear of God. And it's a healthy fear, by the way. It's not a fear that, you take your little child, does a nice colouring at home. At school, comes back home and says, Dad, I've done this picture, and Dad is in a good mood. And he goes, oh, that's amazing. Well done, little kid. Grabs him by the cheek. Now, get to your room. No, well done, that's brilliant. The next day, little kid draws a picture, brings it home, but Dad's not in a good mood this day. So he comes in and Dad grabs it and he says, that's rubbish, it's awful, rips it up, throws it. That little kid then fears his dad because his dad's mood just changes, whether he's in a good mood or a bad mood. Our God's not like that. He's not a God that's like in a good mood one day, bad mood another day. We serve a God that is, slow to anger, but abounding in love. If we got what we deserve, none of us would be here right now. It's by the grace of God that we're still standing. It's by the grace of God that there's breath in our lungs. It's by the grace of God that we're still walking. It's by the grace of God and the grace alone that saves. We serve an amazing God that loves us so much that he would go to the cross for us and pay the penalty and the price that each and every one of us deserve. Whether we believe in him or we don't believe him, it doesn't change the fact that that's still the truth. And so it's to him that I turn, and it's to him that I say, God, I keep trying to beat this with my flesh and I can't do it. I keep trying to put practical things in place and I can't do it. I need to do those practical things, of course. The rain's coming, the rain's coming, the rain's coming. I need to do those practical things to try and get out of the rain, if you like, or to try and keep warm in the rain. But the truth is, unless I combine it with the things of God, I'm always going to be battling that habit, that addiction, that waste of my time, that wrong direction that I'm going. Unless I bring God into the situation, I'm always going to be fighting an uphill battle. I might think that I'm winning for a certain time, but eventually it's going to floor me. Now, I think, some people might say you shouldn't say that, but 100%, I'll never ever touch drugs again. Like, 100%, that's not for me to put a test down for the enemy now to try and knock Aaron off. I'm 100%, my focus is in Christ. I've built a fire within me that the fire burns so bright. Remember the snake that comes out? The snake comes out of the fire. Well, guess what? The snake, the viper, was always there. The fire was what disturbed the snake and made the snake come out. There's probably snakes already around you in and around your life. And when you get on fire for God, all of a sudden they come out and you say, oh, now I'm on fire for God, everyone's turning against me. No, they were already turned against you. The snake was already there. It's just the fire made the snake feel uncomfortable, so the snake comes out. But what does Paul do? It says he picks up the snake, and what does he do? He throws it in the fire. So the fire... This is preaching, it's not teaching, okay? But the fire that's in you is going to disturb snakes, okay? It's going to disturb snakes. And it's going to cause vipers to try and bite onto you. And the viper's going to bite onto you. And what you do, throw it in the fire. The fire kills it. The fire disturbs them, and the fire kills it. Because, think about it, well, you might not know, but there's many people that's come against me. Many people have come against me, said many things. When I say many people, a handful of people, but they're quite consistent. And so, or they were consistent. And so they say a lot of things, they do a lot of things, but the fire that's in me doesn't allow it to bother me. And so they're saying stuff, they're doing stuff, but it quietens down after a time. It's like they either get bored of it, or it's like, well, there's nothing we can do it's not going to affect him in any way, shape or form. It doesn't matter how much they throw at me. It doesn't matter how much the snake tries to bite me. Every day I just pick that snake up and throw it in the fire. What's the fire? It's like this love that I have for Christ. Nothing's going to stop me from doing what God's called me to do, which is to plant from here to the coast, into Europe, into the world. It doesn't matter how many times I'm bit. It doesn't matter. The fire that's in me is going to disturb things around me. It's going to. And it will in you. Because all of a sudden, the people that you used to hang about with, the practices that they have and the things that they do, it's no longer you. When Christ lives in you, it's no longer you. And so it's going to cause some things to come out of the woods. It's going to cause some things to be disturbed and feel uncomfortable around you. It's all part of the Christian walk. But when it rains, when it storms, when there's a shipwreck, we've got to keep putting wood in our fire. We need to keep adding wood to the fire. Chapter 28, verse 2. Can I just have verse 2 a sec? Because I think this word kindle is important. And the natives showed us unusual kindness, for they kindled a fire and made us all welcome. This word kindle, the verb, it simply means to set something on fire, to set something alight. So right now, today, I could be preaching, and I'm preaching, and all of a sudden something sets on fire in you, and you go, I want to serve Jesus forever. That's great. I've kindled a fire. The Holy Spirit has kindled a fire within you through the preaching today. But within 3 days, or within 7 days, or within 2 weeks, that fire that was kindled has gone. The rain has put it out. The storms have come in. The shipwreck, whatever it may be, it's gone unless, as we carry on to verse 3, but when Paul had gathered a bundle of sticks and laid them on the fire. Unless you go and gather sticks, unless you go and add wood to the fire, it doesn't matter who kindles. Like prayer evenings can kindle a fire within you. A conference can kindle a fire in you. A preaching can kindle a fire in you. I can preach something. I've preached many times and people have gone, it's like that was just for me. Now, I might not know the situation that's in their life. Many people in this room will have had that. Maybe not necessarily me preaching, but whoever's preaching. You've listened to something and you've gone, it was like God was just talking to me. That's it, I want to serve you, Lord. And it kindles something in you straight away. There's a fire's happened. But if you don't do something about that fire, the fire's going to go out. And yet in Leviticus 6:13, when we take that verse, say the fire on the altar can never go out. Yes, again, totally different meaning at the time, but taking it with a preach. The fire can never go out in our lives, church. It can never go out. We must add wood to the fire. Keep adding wood to the fire. Don't just sit back and say, oh, the storm's here. When the storm's past, then I'll serve him. Serve him while you're going through the rain. Serve him. Keep pushing into him. Even when you've got a bad habit that you know you shouldn't have. Even when you're wasting time, when you know you're not using your time in the right way. Even when, whatever it is, when the rain comes, that's just rain. That's just your daily habits. That's the things that you're going through in life. But even in those things, keep adding wood to the fire. Why? Because the fire kills those snakes. Why? The fire will kill it. Eventually, like people come to me at times and say, I want to get rid of this in my life. I want to do this. How can I defeat this? How can I defeat that? And I'm literally spend more time with God. And it's like, really? I said, put more of God in you. And the more of God you put in you, the less of the world you have. There's no room for the world. And I don't mean the world out there. We want to tell the world. But I mean the things of the world, the desires of the world, the love of the world. There's no room for it. Because it's like we're walking around. No, I want to lean on God. There was a song that we sang at the beginning. It kept talking about leaning. I'm going to lean on God. I'm going to lean on God. But if God's not there, if God's not part of your daily life, you'll lean on other things. Just naturally, we will lean on other things. If you've got habits in your life that you know aren't good, if you've got practices in your life that you know aren't good, don't try and deal with them and then say, now I'll serve you, Lord. Don't try and just get before God. Get before God. Start adding wood to the fire. Start adding wood to the fire. And yes, start putting practical things in place. Yes, start fighting this and say, no, we're going to deal with this. But don't let your slip-ups or your mistakes or your bad habits or anything else keep you out of the things of God. Don't let them keep you away from God. Don't let them keep you away from prayer. Don't let them keep you away from worship. Don't let them keep you away from home group. Don't let them keep you away from church. Push into those things. That's you collecting wood. That's you building. That's you grabbing a bundle of sticks and putting it on top of the fire and keeping that fire alight. As the fire gets brighter, we'll deal with more and more of these things in our life. As we go closer to God, things in us just start to fall off. They start to strip off us. We have choices in this world. We have choices. And there was this, I heard one man said this, there was 2 Sauls in the Bible. There was one Saul that went to Ramah to kill David. And there was another Saul that went to Damascus to kill Christians. They both had an encounter with God. They both had a choice. They both made different choices. One became an apostate, one became an apostle. One became an apostate, one became an apostle. They both had an encounter with God. They both had the same name. They both were doing the same kind of things. They both had choices. One turned over to God and said, God, I'm going to serve you now, and I'm going to go preach to the Gentiles. The other one turned away. We have choices. We all have choices. We can't blame other people for the things that have gone on in our lives, even though there can be reasons. Don't get me wrong. I used to work, we looked after children all the time. That was my job. And they looked after children that I worked with have gone through some really, really tough times in their life. And they would come up with excuses why they would have certain behavior. And I'd say, look, I get it. You've gone through a tough life. You've got a tough story there. But you can't keep using it as an excuse. You can't. It's a reason why you feel this way. It's a reason why some of this is your behavioral pattern. But you can't have it as an excuse that I can do what I want because this happened to me. No, in life, tough things happen to us all. And if we keep making excuses, we will never, ever move on. When we gather wood, let's just take 3 little things really quickly. 3 little things. When we gather wood, prayer, let that be one of your sticks. Let prayer be one of your sticks. And if you turn around and you say to yourself, and we all do this, I was too busy to pray. I'm too busy. Let me tell you why prayer is important, because prayer deals with pride. Prayer deals with pride. And the moment we say, I was too busy to pray, that's because you've got too much pride in your life. And you say, oh, that's a bit harsh. No, I haven't. Of course it is, because if your child was on a life support machine, I guarantee you'd stop everything and start praying. I guarantee if the need was big enough and it helped you out and the need was big enough for your life, you'd stop everything and pray. It's pride that stops us from praying. Why? Because we believe that we can get through the week without praying. That's a prideful stance to have. I can do this week without turning my eyes onto Jesus. Oh, but now I'm going through a tough time, I'll turn my eyes onto Jesus. Prayer. Grab prayer as a stick. In this bundle of sticks as we talk about, go grab prayer. Prayerlessness resurrects bad habits. Okay? Prayerlessness resurrects bad habits. Leonard Ravenhill once said this, and I love Leonard Ravenhill. He said, a praying man stops sinning, but a sinning man stops praying. A praying man stops sinning, but a sinning man stops praying. Prayer is so important to add to the fire that's going on inside us. Add a bundle of sticks and let one of those sticks be prayer. The second one, fasting. Fasting, why? It deals with lust. It deals with the appetites of our body. Like, I want this, I want that. No, fasting deals with it. Fasting, by the way, is against food. All right? So the Hebrew and the Greek, it means abstaining from food. The Hebrew word means to cover one's mouth. So it's to cover yourself from food. It's not about fasting social media or fasting anything else. It is about fasting of food. Those things, when you say, I'm going to fast social media, I'm going to fast this, those are what we call, I would say, sacrifice. You're going to sacrifice that for the good of God. That's good as well. Okay, but that's not fasting, just to get a teaching bit in. Fasting is all about food. It's, I'm going to fast food. I'm going to have a dry fast. I'm not drinking, eating, or I'm going to just have a water fast where I'm just going to drink water and that's it. But I'm going to say, I'm going to fast. It's a practice that the Christian should do. In Matthew chapter 6, Jesus said, when you fast. It wasn't if you fast. He said, when you fast. What did he say as well? He said, when you pray. The other one was when you give. So those were three things that Jesus thought we should do. So I think there are three sticks we should throw onto this fire. When you fast. We should develop a lifestyle of fasting as the Christian. I noticed this, the first temptation in the Bible, what was it? Food. It involved food. First temptation in the Bible, it involved food. What was the first temptation Jesus had thrown at him? 40 days he fasted, and the Bible said, and he was hungry. Well, thanks for pointing that out. Of course he was. 40 days without food, of course he was hungry. What did the devil say to him? What did the enemy do? He said, turn this stone into bread. It was food. And then I see Israel, when they came out of Egypt, what was the first temptation with them? They turned around and they said, wouldn't it be better if we'd stayed home where we had meat and we had bread in Egypt? And they were grumbling and talking about going back. Why? Because of food. We should bring fasting into us. Why? Because the Christian life is about self-denial. The New Age stuff is about finding yourself and all that. But the Christian life is about self-denial. The Christian life is about picking up your cross and following him. The Christian life is about being crucified to this world. That's what the Christian life is. It's a battle. This isn't easy stuff. And yet if we just keep adding, just a stick at a time in this fire, your fire will grow more and more and more. And the final one, just because Jesus said it in Matthew 6 about giving as well, how do you deal with greed? That's another thing that is a problem within us as people. Greed. We want to store up the material things of this world. Well, guess what? You can't take any of it with you anyway. You could take nothing with you. But we store it up. So how do you deal with greed? There's only one way. Give. So LBC, one of our principles, as the finance comes in, it comes in one hand, we give it out in another hand. We give. We give generously. We give with a generosity. We give with a heart that says, I want to give out. Why? Not because if we religiously give finance or we religiously give whatever, in this case we're talking about finance, but it's not a case of if I religiously give then I earn extra points with God. No, it's about a heart condition. It's about a heart that says that person's in need, I'm going to bless. It's about a heart condition that says the church, I'm going to give this to the church that they may do that. It's a giving, it's a lifestyle of generosity. It's the only way to destroy greed. It's the only way. And that's not a ploy to try and push at people's heartstrings that you give more, nothing like that. It's a practice that has to come from within your own relationship with God. It's technically nothing to do with the church. It's between you and God. 3 things Jesus said in Matthew 6. When you pray, when you fast, when you give. Why did he give those 3 things? They're obviously things that work, if you like storms and rain and shipwrecks in our life. They're the things that will extinguish the flame within us. Deal with the things. Do the things that God told us to do. Things are going to start happening in your life and in the church. I always say to people, read the book of Acts. And whenever I go to a church, I say, read the book of Acts. Do what the early church did. Get what the early church got. It's so simple. Do what the early church did. Get what the early church got. The early church, they would fast. All the time I see them talking about fasting. The early church, what did they do? They prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed. That's where the Holy Spirit fell. It's Pentecost today. Many churches are talking about the birth of the church today. And I know we haven't necessarily gone in that direction, but I'm not a traditionalist anyway. I just want to go where I feel the Spirit of God's leading us. But the truth is the church was born. We celebrate the church being born on the day of Pentecost. And that's in the Christian calendar today. In the early church, they prayed a lot. That's where the fire of God fell. In the upper room where 120 were praying. Prayer was so important to them. Fasting, they fasted over big decisions. They fasted. Jesus said of one when someone had a demon in them, and they said, look, whoa, disciples, this one comes out only with prayer and fasting. So there's something about fasting. When you read it in its context, it was talking about unbelief, because God said, you unbelieving generation, how much longer do I need to be with you? And then he goes on to say, this sort comes out only in prayer and fasting. Fasting isn't about twisting God's arm. Fasting is about changing us. It's not about changing God's mind with a situation. Fasting is about changing us. It's denying ourselves for the very physical thing that we want, food. It's denying ourselves of that for a spiritual meaning, for something bigger, for something deeper. And it deals with unbelief in our lives. We've all got unbelief in our life. That's why the one man said to Jesus, help me overcome my unbelief. At times we all have to say, Jesus, help me overcome my unbelief. Unbelief is like a spiritual cancer. It gets into faith, and it's the enemy of faith. Unbelief, when we fast, there's something about fasting that brings us closer to God. There's something about fasting that channels us into this. And then the third thing was the giving. As I look through the early church, I see there was a time in the early church when they laid everything at the apostles' feet and they distributed where there was a need. Imagine the church being called to do something like that today. They would freak out. Imagine that. They freak out if the offering bag goes round in some places. The church only wants me for my money. What the church going to spend it on? Well, if the church is spending it on the right things, it'll be on the things of the kingdom. But one thing I do notice is whenever anybody goes to the shop or whenever anyone goes and buys food or anything else, you don't question what they're about to spend it on, the big supermarket or the big charity that you give to or anything else. You don't question that. But the moment finance comes to the church, all of a sudden we've got this cynical feeling and this like, I'm going to question it, I'm going to question it, I'm going to question it. But we don't question anything else. When you give a tenner to the newsagents for your bag of whatever, or you go to the chippy and you give them £7.50 for a bag of chips now, which used to be like £1 or something when the last time I went. And you don't question what they're going to do with the rest of that. No, because you're receiving so much straight away. And yet the moment we come to give to God's church, all of a sudden it's, oh, what will they do with the money? Can I give there? Can I? Technically, and I must admit, I'm the same. I'm a cynical kind of guy, so that's me as well. But technically, you're not giving to the church, you're giving to God. God sees what you give. If the church that you attend, and obviously you guys attend this church, so we better be doing the right things with the finance. I don't want to stand before God one day and him say, Aaron, why did you allow this? Why did you allow that? Or why was you part of this? Why was you part of that? No, sir. And so for us, we have this big thing from here to the coast, into Europe, into the world. We ask that God will give us wisdom in all things with finances. But forget the church, forget that, forget LBC, forget us. It's about you and God. It doesn't even have to go into the church way. It goes into the things of the kingdom. It might be that there's someone on your street that needs helping. This generosity, this loving other people, this loving God. When we love God that much, it's an overflow to him. It's an overflow to him. And so those three things, prayer, let that be a stick thrown onto the fire. Fasting, let it be a stick thrown onto the fire. A generous giving, let it be a stick thrown onto the fire. It will deal with greed. It will deal with pride. It will deal with the appetites of the flesh. Anyway, we've well run out of time.